What's up? How y'all doing? Today is April 28th, 2016, and this is your boy KC coming at you live with episode 22 of my podcast show. I got a lot to talk about this week because a lot has happened over the past 2 weeks. First and foremost, we lost one of the most iconic musicians to ever step in the music game. Prince died April 21st, and it's still disheartening to think about because a week before he died, he was taken to the hospital and they said for flu-like symptoms, and it looked like everything was fine. Then all of a sudden they found him dead in his music studio. And it sucks because Prince is also one of those guys that influenced the type of music that I listen to, the music that I used to sing. You know what I'm saying? This guy was very talented. He could play a lot of instruments. He wrote a lot of songs for people. He wrote his own songs. And that takes a lot of talent to do. Not many artists could do that. Him and Michael Jackson were those types of guys, you know? And it just sucks. He influenced a lot of guys like D'Angelo, Jamie Foxx, Genuine, Morris Day. There are a lot of people who have taken something from this man's style and implemented it into their own style of music. And it just sucks that he's gone because we're losing all the greats one by one. You know, Michael Jackson's gone, Whitney Houston, Prince, James Brown. There's just so many artists that have, they changed the game so many times, over and over again. And it's just a shame that a lot of them are no longer around. Like Ray Charles, like pretty much all we have in that whole thing is Stevie Wonder. He's the only one that we have left now, when you think about it. Prince's style and his music will forever be immortalized in music history. He will be truly missed, and rest in peace. If you're a huge wrestling fan, just like me and millions of other people around the world, you've heard of Chyna. We lost her also April 20th of this month. At the age of 45, she was found dead by one of her friends who went to go check up on her. And the further I read into it, it sounds like it was an overdose because they said that she was drinking heavily the night before. And this is a woman. I'm going to talk about both the negative and positive because I'm not going to sit here and pretend like she was an angel. Chyna was a mess. Chyna did a lot of things to mess up her life to the point to where there was no return. You know, and it just sucks to see somebody go out that way. And I would be lying if I sat here and I said that I was shocked and I didn't see it coming. I know it sounds cold, but how many wrestlers over the years have we heard died from the same circumstances that she did? Seriously, it gets to the point to where you almost expect it when you hear about a wrestler drinking heavy and doing heavy drugs. You know, which is why I'm surprised and I'm happy that Jake Roberts is still around and Scott Hall is still around because those guys have seriously had some terrible lives. You know, but I'm not talking about the two of them. Chyna came along in a world full of men because you look at the women that they had on the roster back then. They had Marlena, who was just a manager. You know what I'm saying? You had Jackie, you had Sable, and that's pretty much it. All of a sudden, here comes this big, gigantic woman out of nowhere. She manhandles Marlena. She's choking her like a rag doll. That's crazy. But she comes out and she beats up guys and body slams dudes like Mick Foley. She body slammed Mick Foley. Now that's some strength right there. And I gotta admit, I started to grow on her because I'm like, let's see what else badass shit she can do. She was the first and only woman to win the Intercontinental Championship. Thank God for that. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that was great because that time when she shared the belt with Chris Jericho, that shit sucked. I ain't even gonna lie about that. She was the first woman to enter the Royal Rumble. She was also the first woman to compete for #1 contendership of the WWF Championship. And there was a time where they considered putting the title on her. I don't know if that would have been a good idea or not. I don't think I could have taken that seriously or anybody else. You know, you got a world full of giants like Undertaker, and you got The Rock and Austin and Triple H and all those guys who were the big stars of that Attitude Era. I don't know if it would have been a good idea to have Chyna go head up with these guys. But anyways, that was historical for the women. And even though Mick Foley was responsible for getting Triple H over to that next level as a main eventer, back in 2000 when they had those series of matches, Triple H owes Chyna a lot for the impact that she had on his career. Because Triple H, to me, I've always said it, I don't hate the man. He is a good wrestler. I never said he was bad as far as talent goes. But Triple H by himself was always a boring, bland wrestler. He can never get over on his own. He is a charisma vacuum. That's why they surrounded him with other people who knew how to entertain, so hopefully it could rub off on him. There's a chance that he might not even be in the spot he's in if it wasn't for Chyna, and that's the truth. And to those people who blindly blame Triple H and Stephanie for everything that Chyna has been through, as a man, I was always taught that whatever decision you make, whether it's positive or negative, will affect your life. I don't go around blaming other people for my mistakes, for the things that I did wrong in life. And you people need to get over it already. People break up every single day. Chyna was no special case. Triple H and Stephanie have been together since 2002. They got married. They got 3 kids. Get over it. You know what I'm saying? It is not Triple H's fault or Stephanie's fault. They did not force Chyna to do drugs and to drink and to go into pornography and all that shit. That was her decisions to do that. And I'm sick of people blaming them. All they did was fall in love. That's it. Yes, Stephanie fell in love with Triple H and she stole him. It happens all the time. If you want to blame somebody, blame Vince McMahon because he's the one that created the storyline in the first place. All they were doing was their job. You can't help who you fall in love with. And the funny thing is, the ironic thing is, these people are the same people that support Chris Benoit. Now, minus the whole Benoit incident, I'm going to take y'all down wrestling history lane real quick. For those people who don't know, there is a reason why Kevin Sullivan hated Chris Benoit. Because Chris Benoit stole his wife. Before it was Nancy Benoit, it was Nancy Sullivan. They were married for a long time. Now, Kevin Sullivan's not innocent because he was the booker at that time, and he booked that storyline, and art imitates life, and they fell in love and got married. So how can you not condemn Chris Benoit for what he did? Isn't it the same thing? But you're going to be hypocritical and bash Triple H and Stephanie. Enough is enough. Let it go. It's done. It's been done. And it sucks that Chyna is gone. I hope that she can find peace where she is and rest in peace. Before I get to the Raw results, I have to say this. Ric Flair, what the hell is going on with you, man? He got stopped at the airport for being under the influence. WWE warned him about that stuff. They told him to straighten up, and the last thing that he needs is to lose that WWE money because we know how his financial situation is. But that's not even the worst thing. On SmackDown, he flubbed one of the worst lines you could ever do in a promo. He told Natty to go home and kill herself. How do you even come up with something like that? How does that even come to your mind? I know Rick didn't mean that. At least I hope he didn't mean it. But even Hulk Hogan couldn't botch a line like that. You told Natty to go home and kill herself. You know they're going to take that out of the promo when they do the build up between Natty and Charlotte. That was just horrible, man. I hope whatever he's going through, he can get over it and come back stronger because this is not the Ric Flair that I want to see. Anyways, on to the Raw results from April 28th. We had Apollo Crews defeat Stardust. Apollo Crews is amazing. I hope they use this guy right because he can be a big star. We had Enzo Amore and Big Cass defeat the Social Outcasts with the New Day on commentary and the Vaudevillains out there at ringside. You know, I like how they're taking the time to build up the tag team division again because the tag team division hasn't been this good in years. And I like how they're bringing it back up again. We had Charlotte and Ric Flair join Dean Ambrose on the Ambrose Asylum. And they just had a typical back and forth. This segment was kind of boring. I mean, seriously, I don't even know why. I think it was just a time killer. Baron Corbin defeated Damien Sandow. He's another guy that I don't understand what the hell they're doing with this guy. I'm glad that he's on TV, but they brought him on there just for him to be a squash guy. And that sucks. because he deserves so much better than that. Yet another guy I wish would quit WWE and go on to another wrestling organization to be successful. We had Kalisto team up with Sami Zayn and Cesaro to defeat the League of Nations by countout when Del Rio and Rusev walked out on Sheamus, putting an end to this group. And it was only but so far they was going to go anyways, because they were only put together for one reason, and that was to get Roman Reigns over. And how that worked, that was successful, wasn't it? Can't you just sense the sarcasm coming out of me? Speaking of Roman Reigns, he was in a segment with The Miz and Maurice on Miz TV, in which The Miz tried to attack Reigns and he was tossed out of the ring. This is your main event for the night, people. The Miz, of all people. I guess they figured since everybody hates The Miz, Reigns beating the crap out of him will probably get him over. I don't think so. And what made it worse is that Reigns beat The Miz by disqualification when Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson came out and beat the holy hell out of Reigns. And the Usos came out to help out Reigns. AJ got involved. This worries me. This worries me a lot. Because if you remember a couple of episodes ago, I said I hope that they don't just have AJ fed to Reigns on his way to going up against John Cena, because we all know that's going to happen. That's the truth. But WWE, listen to me very carefully. A heel AJ is a terrible idea. You don't want to take someone that the fans are behind and that they love and turn him heel, because it's not going to work. It's not going to help Reigns. The fans do not want to boo AJ Styles. You don't want to do that. All it's going to do is make Reigns even more hated than what he is already. This is a stupid idea. If they're smart, they need to throw a twist in there and turn Reigns heel, because that is the only thing that's going to help this man. They tried everything to get Reigns over and it's not working. He's got that Rock syndrome from 1997 when they were chanting the Die Rocky Die chants. It wasn't until they turned the Rock heel and he started coming up with the cool persona, that's when the fans started to get behind him. But this smug ass Roman Reigns thing, I'm not a bad guy, I'm not a good guy, I'm the guy. That's perfect for a heel. This is what they need. They need to let him go out there and become a full-fledged heel and let him just brag. I think that would be awesome. That's exactly what he needs. Because you keep him heel for about a year or two, that's what he needs. So that when he does turn face, maybe the fans will warm up to the guy a little more. But you do not need a heel AJ versus Reigns, because it is not going to turn out great at all. Be smart about it and turn Reigns heel. Video gamers, it's that time again. Microsoft has ceased production of the Xbox 360, officially making that system archived. The PS3 won't be far behind, putting an end to this era. Those three systems, the Wii, the PS3, and the 360, were running the show for a very long time, and it sucks for it to come to an end, but you gotta move on towards the future. And speaking of the future, I have a few details on Nintendo's new console they're supposed to be coming out with next year. They say in March, but who knows. The NX is supposed to be a hybrid between a handheld console and an actual console, meaning that it will have a screen on it so that you can go on the go. I'm guessing it's saying that it's supposed to be as powerful as the Xbox One. We will see about that. And it also says it will have, you could connect by cloud. That's the only details that I could find on it. I've been researching all over the internet, and most of it is just a bunch of rumors. Nintendo really hasn't come out with anything. They have a couple of games that they threw out there which really didn't surprise me, like the Luigi's Mansion 3, another Mario game, another Pokemon game, and another Zelda game. I mean, it really doesn't surprise me, because I sat here and told you guys that that's all that Nintendo seems to come out with. The PC Engine or TurboGrafx 16 had potential. What is this system that I'm talking about? It was an obscure system that was released in Japan October 30th, 1987, and we got it here 2 years later in the US August 29th, 1989. This system was the first system released in the 16-bit era, even though it had an 8-bit CPU. So it was on par with the juggernauts such as the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. It sold poorly in the US, but in Japan it sold very well, and it even outsold the Mega Drive for a brief period of time. This system was the first system to use a CD-ROM and was able to save CD-ROM data. And you know what that means? Highly priced system, everyone. This system was sold for $400. No wonder it failed. This system was made by Hudson Soft and NEC, and it sold 750,000 units worldwide. It ended in May 1994 due to poor sales. It did, however, manage to squeeze out a handheld, the Turbo Express, which was able to play TurboGrafx 16 games, kind of like the Sega Nomad handheld that was able to play the Sega Genesis games. It did have potential, but I'll tell you like this, I did not play many games for it, but the best version of Double Dragon 2 I have ever played was on this system. I'm not kidding. I played every version of Double Dragon 2 that exists, and none of them come close to this version on the PC Engine. They had actual cutscenes. You think that shit on Nintendo was awesome? You ain't seen nothing until you played this. The fighting mechanics are way better than any other Double Dragon game I've ever played. If you ever come across this game, it is a must-have. Emulate it, do whatever you can to play it. You'll thank me for it later.
Rise from your grave.
The game of the week is an old classic from Sega, Alter Beast. This is one of my favorite games of all time. It's set back in ancient Greece when a centurion who died in battle was resurrected by the god Zeus to save his daughter Athena from an evil villain named Neph. This warrior has the ability to collect 3 spirit balls. One makes him stronger each time. So when he collects the first one, his shirt rips off, he gets stronger. The second one he collects, he gets all roided up like Hulk Hogan back in 1985. And then the third one, he turns into a beast for each level. The goal is to collect all 3 of these so that you can fight the big monster at the end of the level. The game is pretty short, only about 5 levels long, but you turn into different types of animals that do different abilities. The first level, you turn into a werewolf. He's able to shoot fireballs and to run very fast. The second level, you turn into a dragon that can shoot electricity. The third level, you turn into a bear. I really didn't like that one too much, but you can do like some kind of cannonball attack that harms your enemies. The fourth level, you turn into a tiger. In the fifth level, you turn into the gold werewolf, which is the strongest of all forms. It's games like this that made gaming when I was growing up so great because it was so creative. And who could have come up with a concept like that? Somebody to take some from ancient Greece. What a little revisions and imagination, because I sure so don't think there were any werewolves running around back then. But to take something and make it that fun is something great. I wish they would do more of that these days when it comes to gaming. You will have fun playing this game. Anime otakus, I have some more I want to say about Dragon Ball Super. Last week we left off in a very epic spot with Goku using the Kaioken on top of the Super Saiyan Blue technique. And he fired a Kamehameha the same way that Gohan fired at Bojack and went through the beam to try to attack Hit. That's the guy's name. His name is Hit. But he used his technique to freeze Goku in time so that he could dodge the attack, kind of like Goldo does. And they had an epic fight. They beat the living hell out of each other. And that's when the fight went from being epic to just being downright strange and underwhelming, because in the middle of nowhere, Goku just eliminates himself. He jumps out the ring and eliminates himself for no reason. I don't understand why. It doesn't make any sense to me, but it just further goes that big plot hole that they was talking about when he told Broly, I never learned how to give up. What about when he gave up against Cell and then he gave up against Hit just now? I guess he did learn how to give up. And with Hit being the winner, he goes on to face the weakest opponent in Beerus's group. And Goku is just cheering this guy on and everything like he's so strong. This goofball does a flip and lands headfirst on the concrete in the ring and bows to Hit like he's going to give him a great fight. And he hits him with everything he has, and Hit just looks at him, and out of nowhere, Hit just flies out of the ring in pain. So he took the Android 18 route back when Hercule wanted to win the World Martial Arts Tournament, and he hit 18 as hard as he could, and she just kind of flew out the ring. Bullshit. I don't understand why, but I guess if you think about it, they did say in their fight that they were just pawns of Champa and Beerus, and Goku said not for long, and when you put it that way, I guess it does make sense why he eliminated himself and why Hit eliminated himself. So with Champa, he was getting ready to kill everybody in his group when they both look down and they see the Lord of all Lords, a guy named Zeto who looks like a child's play toy, and that's how the episode ends. First and foremost, the episode wasn't bad. I enjoyed the fight between these two guys. They beat the living hell out of each other. There was some weird shit that kind of brought the episode down. So if I had to scale it from 1 to 10, I'd probably give it a 7, just because of the epic fight that they had. While I'm on the subject of Dragon Ball Z, I would like to talk about my favorite arc in that series. We all know that there are 4 major arcs in the Dragon Ball Z series. There's the Saiyan arc, there's the Frieza arc, the Android/Cell arc, and the Majin Buu arc. Each of them brought us something different, so I'm going to run through all the arcs, and then I will tell you my favorite at the end of everything. The Saiyan arc. Goku and Piccolo team up together, 2 enemies, to take on Raditz. Goku dies, runs Snake Way, meets King Kai, learns the Kaioken technique, and becomes significantly stronger than he was the previous year. This is a dark period in Dragon Ball Z, as Nappa and Vegeta come to Earth, and one by one, Yamcha, Chaozu, Tien, and Piccolo all die, giving their lives to protect the Earth from Nappa and Vegeta. Goku shows up, makes a quick work of Nappa, and goes on to have a damn epic fight against Vegeta. Blow for blow, Vegeta has to transform into the Ozaru, the Great Ape, and crushes every bone in Goku's body. So it took the help of Gohan, Krillin, and Yajirobe, along with Goku, to fend off Vegeta. The Frieza arc brought us even more. Not only did we learn about Planet Vegeta's destruction, we also learned that there was another set of Dragon Balls on a planet called Namek, in which a super tyrant named Frieza is trying to seek them out to get immortality. We also see character development and progression, because Goku and Vegeta are full-blooded Saiyans, and Gohan is half Saiyan. They all get Zenkai boosts, which they get when they recover from near-death experiences, so they're all stronger than they were on Earth. Goku is training on his way to Namek to help his friends so that he could get a chance to fight Frieza. Vegeta is much stronger than he was on Earth, and we also learn of the aggressive and ruthless killing nature that Vegeta possesses, because nobody killed more people in this arc than Vegeta. He killed Kui, Zarbon, Dodoria, Recoome, Jace, Birder, Goldo, and the list goes on. We also see Gohan and Krillin get their potential unlocked by the Elder Guru. We see the return of Piccolo, who fuses with Nail to become much stronger to the point where he could take on Frieza in his second form. We had some sad points in this arc with the deaths of Vegeta and Krillin, but they each taught Goku something very valuable. One, that Vegeta was not as cold as everybody thought he was, because he was able to shed tears in his final moments of his life, and with the death of Krillin, we got to see for the first time the Super Saiyan form and what it looked like and what he was capable of doing. And Goku went on to have a great fight against Frieza. It was a little long. I mean, there were some episodes where I was like, come on, end it already. And that fight lasts about 4 hours long, and that's what the fillers cut out. 4 hours of that. And when it finally ends, everything turns out great. Everybody's brought back to life, Krillin, Yamcha, Chaozu, and Tien. But it did leave us in a bit of a cliffhanger, because the planet Namek was destroyed when Frieza blew it up. We all thought that Goku might have been killed along with it, and that takes us into the Android/Cell arc. In this saga, we're introduced to the concept of time travel. We also learn that there are 4 timelines in the Dragon Ball Z universe. It also has a lot of plot holes, but I'm not going to get into that right now. We got to see Gohan progress into a preteen, and we got to see that there is a form more powerful than the original Super Saiyan form. We also got to see Piccolo fuse with Kami and become a Super Namek. We learned that Cell needs both Android 17 and 18 to become Perfect, the ultimate being in the universe. We got to see Gohan become a Super Saiyan 2 and become the strongest fighter in that universe. And this is Gohan at his best. And it all goes downhill from here. I mean, trust me when I tell you. So we got to see a lot of those things implemented because these timelines are very different from each other. I'm not going to go into that. That'll be another video for another day about the 4 timelines in Dragon Ball Z. And last but not least, we have the Majin Buu saga. In this arc, we're introduced to the Super Saiyan 3 form. We got to see 2 forms of fusion, the Potara fusion, which gave us Vegito, and we got to see the fusion dance, which gave us Gotenks and Gogeta in the movie Fusion Reborn. We're introduced to the Kais and what their placements are in the universe. So we did get to see a lot of interesting things in this arc. Now make no mistake about it, I've already said before that out of all the arcs, this is my least favorite because it has so many annoying characters, including Majin Buu himself, Videl, Kid Trunks, Hercule, and Goten. Even Goku gets annoying towards the end of it, so I really didn't care for this. So with that being said, I'm going to list it from my favorite to my least arcs, 1 through 4. Number 1 is the Frieza arc. Why the Frieza arc? Because it's straight to the point. They know what they want to do. They're going to Namek to collect the Dragon Balls so that they can bring their friends back from the dead. They have a lot of great fights. Goku becomes a Super Saiyan and he has an epic battle, though it's too long, but still epic, against Frieza. Straight to the point, that's it. Coming in at number 2 is the Android and Cell saga, where we're introduced to new characters such as Future Trunks and Future Gohan. 2 badasses that we should have gotten in the first place. Much better than these 2 flaming pussies that we get when Gohan becomes a freaking fruity superhero and we get that annoying ass Kid Trunks in the Majin Buu saga. We also got to see forms beyond the Super Saiyan form. We got to see Kid Gohan become the forefront of this saga and kill the major villain. And that was great. We got to see Piccolo become a Super Namek and establish his power among the Saiyans. So that was number 2. Number 3 is the Saiyan saga, because we got to see Piccolo and Goku team up together. Goku runs Snake Way, learn the Kaioken technique, and become miles ahead of Nappa and on par with Vegeta, at least until he transforms into the Ozaru. So we got a lot of great battles and brought a lot of darkness to Dragon Ball Z that we haven't seen since King Piccolo. And coming in last place is the Majin Buu saga. Maybe if we didn't have so many annoying people in here and we didn't have a major villain that turns people into food and eats them, I would have enjoyed it more. We did get to see Goku versus Vegeta round 2, which was just as great as their first fight, but I just can't get past the fact that I can't take Majin Buu as a serious threat. So that's my list right there. The anime of the week is Ronin Warriors. It's about a demon lord from the Nether Realm named Talpa. He wants to destroy the world. He's opposed by 5 guys who have access to sacred armor. We have Ryo of Wildfire, who carries the dual katanas. He's the leader of the group. We have Sage of the Halo, who carries the Japanese broadsword. We have Saya the Torrent, who carries the trident. We have Kento of Hard Rock, who carries the nunchakus. He's my favorite. And we have Ronin of Strata, who carries the bow. This is pretty much like the precursor to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, only with all guys. Like, they have sacred armor from feudal Japan. The fighting scenes are epic because of the different weapon styles that each character uses. Not only that, each of their armor has an element embedded in it. Fire, rock, water, wind. It's great. I definitely recommend it to all the hardcore anime fans. And that's it for episode 22 of my podcast show. Check out my other podcast episodes on my channel, KC The Most. You can also check out my new top 10 list of my least favorite Dragon Ball characters. I also did a video on how I think cartoons suck these days. I think you guys will enjoy it. You can check me out on Facebook by the same name, KC The Most. I also have a Twitter handle @MostKC, where you guys can tell me what you think of my videos. This is your boy KC. I'll check you out later. Peace.